Hi, my name's Tiffany. I'm going to be presenting you with my project for intake and output documentation. It's an improvement project that I was doing for my med-surg unit. I currently work at a 22-bed medical surgical unit. It is a nephrology unit. We specialize in the care of our nephrology patients with their kidney injuries, chronic kidney disease, so on and so forth. A lot of our patient population tends to be between 65 and older. We do have some younger patients, but this is where the majority lies. With that being said, many of our patients are at risk for malnutrition or fluid imbalances, either through dehydration or because they have other chronic health issues that tend to cause more complicated care. Many of the diseases that we treat also rely on fluids and nutrition in order to take care of them. So this can be anything from fluid resuscitation for acute kidney injuries to fluid restrictions because they're a dialysis patient. And that said, with our elderly patients, they're often at risk for pressure injuries or already come in with pressure injuries. And this is where nutritional intake documentation becomes very important because it helps us prevent or heal those wounds that they come in with. On average, the documentation on our floor has been about 40%, which is not good. Something that definitely needed to be addressed and resolved. So I had some learning objectives for the staff that I wanted to kind of see accomplished. Those objectives were, wanting the staff to be able to identify the importance of nutrition and wound healing. And I met this by including education on the importance of that nutrition plays, that protein plays in the wound healing. I included information about how much protein that these patients need just to heal their wounds. And this can be anywhere from like 1.5 to 2.0 kilograms of protein per body weight, or milligrams per kilograms. The information I also included was on fluid intake and output, the average fluid intake and output that an adult has on a daily basis, along with that protein, again, to maintain that skin integrity. My second objective for them was to state the types of fluids, or state what counts as a type of fluid for intake and outtake. For this, I had to keep in mind that I wasn't just talking to nurses, but I was also addressing our patient care techs. And some of our patient care techs are actually high school students or higher, but they may not all have that college education. So some of the stuff I included was what is considered fluid intake. So anything that can melt at room temperature. These are the ice chips, Jello, ice cream, anything along those lines. And then for output, talking about that it's emesis, stool, such as diarrhea, any kind of drains that the patient may have, because both the techs and nurses are able to measure the amount of fluids in a drain. And that aids in us making sure that we're maintaining that fluid balance that they need. And for my third one, it was to make sure that staff could identify the importance of I&O documentation. And I felt that the best way to address that was to go over the education about diseases that require strict I&O documentation. These are things like acute kidney injury or rhabdomyolysis. Both of these diseases require fluid resuscitation in order to heal and prevent any kind of kidney injury. And then also wound care, these are all big things, and it's very important for our documentation so that the, dietary or wound care that's aiding us and healing all that are able to go back and see what the patients are actually getting and whether or not they need to increase it with some other supplement. So research that I did, I had done the continuing education modules. I did 3 of them, which included the basic metabolic panel and renal labs, renal and renal functions, and then the endocrine disorders of antidiuretic hormone and fluid balance. Most of these kind of covered over the fluid intake and output of patients and really drove home the importance of why we do it. Unfortunately, there is not a lot of CEUs or information out there that discusses the importance of nutritional intake, something that I think that maybe we should address a little bit more as nurses. And the other part of my research was done through articles. I did about 8 articles that focused on nutrition, wound healing, I's and O documentation, fluid resuscitation, and I did annotated bibliographies on all these just to make it a little bit easier for me to go back through and look at that information to highlight the important sources that I had. The objectives that I had for this project were to do the 8 articles with annotated bibliographies on intake, output, and nutrition, to create a lesson plan with 3 learning objectives, create a pre and post test, to create visual learning tools such as the cards that you see on this slide, and reminders of documentation for I's and O's on our morning huddle. The intake and output is kind of already an ongoing project on our floor, one that they were starting to do, and they were looking for a kind of in-service or a continuing education. So my practicum project really just fell nicely in line with what was already going on, allowing me to utilize that both for my work and for school. I also, during the visual learning tools that I was making, found that during my in-service, a lot of the nursing staff wasn't able to uh, come to the meetings that I had set up. So I felt that the best way to reach everybody was to also send out a PowerPoint that I had created with all the information via email, so that anybody that couldn't obtain, come on night shifts or anything else would still be able to come and read the service and participate in the Survey Monkey, so that I could get some good data and information. I'd like to also say that the project mentor that I had was fantastic. She was a clinical specialist. She had a lot of great information and feedback and input on what I was doing, and she really did kind of help me drive it home for everybody on the unit. So with the in-service, the results were interesting to see, because when I did the survey, 75% of our nurses felt that they documented their I's and O's at least 75% of the time. They were surprised to find out that really it was only about 40% of the time that they were able to do that. And I think that really kind of helped engage in conversation on how can we improve as a unit and be better about these things, because clearly there was an issue. We talked about kind of like some of the ways that we could be better about tracking throughout the day, such as doing a midday subtotal. So looking at that total of intake and output that the patient had in the middle of the day and say, okay, are we not documenting, or is this patient not getting what they should be getting throughout the day? What can we do to improve this to make sure that they're getting the care that they need to get? 100% of the nurses and the patient care techs felt that the education aided in increasing the awareness of documenting and the importance of documenting I's and O's. 100% of them felt that the largest barrier for nutritional documentation had to do with when dietary picks up the trays and not being able to see it in time, which really sparked an interesting conversation among the unit about how can we change the way that we do our procedures or put the tray up so that we can ensure that we see these and document them before the trays are removed by dietary, such as creating a central location and maybe a soiled utility room with a rack to place the trays once we've documented how much the patients had, and then dietary can remove the trays from this rack versus taking them from the patient's room. The pre and post test scores, most of the pre-tests were about 75%, and the post test showed that the knowledge gained was up to 100% on all of the tests. The in-service brought a lot of awareness on our documentation issues, and I think that awareness and that education gained really did help improve the documentation. But more than that, I think it sparked a really great conversation on the unit on how can we do better and what are some other ways that we can implement to increase it more on the nutritional side, because really where we falter the most is documenting the nutrition of our patients. versus their intake and output on fluids. I'd like to say also, I have a pretty amazing team. This is part of my team here. They're a wonderful, supportive work family, and I couldn't have completed this project without them. I feel that we also should always, as nurses, strive to adapt and to overcome so that we can achieve greatness together. If we are not flexible in what we're doing, we're never going to be able to make the changes we need to provide our patients with excellent quality care. Thank you, and I hope you guys have enjoyed my project.